Welcome to Wild and Exposed, your number one adventure, nature, and outdoor photography podcast. Wild and Exposed is hosted by Mike Amaro, Ron Hayes, Jason Loftus, and Mark Raycroft. Thanks for tuning in.
So welcome to another episode of Wild and Exposed podcast. We're coming to you from all over the western United States tonight. We've got a guest, Jake Davis. Jake, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And I'm joined by Michael Morrow and Jason Loftus in Utah and Colorado. So Jake, typically we get these things started with, just kind of an opening question, get to know you question. What's your favorite ever outdoor experience?
Whew. Well, you start with a tough one. Okay, just going off the top of my head, I think that my experience photographing a spirit bear might take the cake. I think just because it took so many years to get that encounter, and this was in the Great Bear Rainforest in Canada, and it ended up having 2 or 3 hours, very close with this bear. He trusted us, and we just got some really incredible behavior. So I think that might be my my number one, but it sure is hard to pick one.
I think that might be my number one too, if it ever happens.
Yeah. Fair enough. Have you tried?
I've had it planned a couple times, but got shut down.
I had a trip there this past fall that obviously got shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back up there. But yeah, the whole ecosystem is just incredible. I mean, you have obviously the spirit bear, which is a white black bear, very unusual subject to photograph, but the whole time you're just like, you're in this very remote area, you're pretty much only accessing it by boat or like float plane. And it's kind of these fjord lands and this old growth forest. And you've got humpbacks, you have orcas, you have grizzly bears, you have coastal wolves, you have bald eagles, you have fog, good light, just about everything you could ask for.
Yeah, that old growth forest is kind of otherworldly when you come from eastern Wyoming. I've never seen anything like that until, even going to northern Alberta, we got into it a little bit, just kind of scratched the surface of what that would look like. But Jake, just for our listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you out of, and how did you come to get started in photography?
Sure. So I'm based in Jackson Hole in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. I started going out there actually when I was a kid. My family would take a trip out there every summer, and we'd spend a month or two pretty much every year of my life. My dad would work. He would play in a music festival out there for a couple months. And so that's where my passion for photography really developed, and for wildlife, was just spending time in that ecosystem from a pretty young age. From about 10 or 12, I was running around with at first it was a disposable camera that my mom bought us. And I burned through it in like the first, I think I burned through it on the flight out. And so I think they knew early on that it was something I was just really, really passionate about. As long as I can remember, there has been nothing that has captured my imagination more than just, spending time with wildlife in wild places. So Jackson's a really good place to do that.
There's nothing wrong with Jackson Hole if you're a wildlife person.
No.
So what led you to pursue wildlife as a career? Because you're a full-time professional, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't really consider much else. I just kind of went for it. I knew that that's just what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to be spending my time outside and with wildlife. And I really thought that if it was at least worth the effort to see if I could make it work, because if I didn't give it a chance, I knew I would always regret that. And so it was slow going at first, trying to figure out what was going to be my business model and what worked for me. But yeah, it started off as kind of, it's the dream, I guess, is if you can combine your work and fun. And I'm thankful I've been able to do that.
So what was your path? I mean, everybody has a different path to get here, right? Some of us went to school for biology and somehow we ended up in it. How did yours progress from that first disposable camera to where you're at now?
Well, so currently I do a lot more in video actually than I do in stills. I'm almost exclusively, I'm working in natural history. But I started off doing stills, and I think the first income I had from photography was doing like retail. So within the first couple of years, I started a greeting card line that I was able to sell. I went to trade shows, and I was able to get it into eventually into like Yellowstone National Park gift shops, and then gift shops around Jackson, and then spread out, through different into different parks throughout the country. So that was kind of the first thing I went after to try to get that revenue stream going. And I guess the whole idea from the beginning was just try to figure out a way to make a little bit of money. I was living in my car at first in Jackson for the first couple of years, which is not an unusual story in Jackson Hole. But it was fine because I could just, I could go to bed and wake up and be on location where I needed to be if I was chasing bears or whatever I was doing. And so it just helped pay those bills. And I started, not long after that, I started doing photography workshops. And so in Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Park, I did a little bit of guiding, I guess, with some local companies before that. But once I got the workshop tour business going, I was, really able to sustain myself out there. And I kind of used that to fund some of these other personal projects that I was really passionate about, like stories that I really wanted to go after and document in the ecosystem, which, I did that for 7 years, basically doing the workshops and then using whatever revenue I was getting from that to kind of put it into developing these other projects. And that eventually led to pitching some stories to some TV shows that are, some wildlife TV shows. And that's where I am now. So that's the short version of it, but I'm just kind of little stepping stones along the way. Yeah.
And those aren't easy stepping stones. Each one of those is a major undertaking. Just getting your cards out. I mean, that is like, it's a lesson in rejection, right? I mean, you take Absolutely. It to 5 stores and maybe one will talk to you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Most say no. Yeah. And a lot of the counts that I eventually did get were not a yes the first time. Some of them took years, 5 years to get, and you have turnover with buyers and you try again, or, the same person and you try again. So yeah, it wasn't easy. I mean, you give the summary of it and it sounds like, oh, that's a really, straightforward path to get there. I mean, like anything, there's real ups and downs. And there were definitely times where I was, discouraged or wondering like, is this going to work? But I always kind of had, I had a pretty clear idea in my head of where I wanted to be and what I wanted to be doing. And so I think that was sufficient motivation to push me through a lot of that rejection or just, whatever ups and downs you go through along the way. So I think that's really important. I mean, for me, if I wasn't going after something that I had like a really strong passion for, and I knew I just loved that more than anything else, I don't think I would have had the, fortitude to stick it out to get to what I'm doing right now is I really love. And so it's just, and I probably will stick with this for a while, working in the television side of things. But
who are you working for right now? Share as much as you can.
Yeah, sure. So the past few years has been, it's a new landmark series for National Geographic. And that's kind of pretty much wrapping up. I have a few more shoots I'm doing on that. And then I'm picking up with the BBC for the Planet Earth 3. So it's, the first one was like kind of a game changer in natural history. It was like, I remember exactly where I was when I saw the trailer for Planet Earth, the very first one when I was a kid. And so we're now on the third one. They released a second one a few years ago. And eventually, if we can ever travel again, we're going to start filming for the third one. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
What was the progression to go from stills to then see that, hey, video might be the thing to do? I started a long time ago with stills, and then I kept seeing this competition in the stills world that was just so fierce. So then I would pack a video camera and I would try to do both. And then of course you're you're doing both halfway. You know, you never get good at either one of them, and you kind of got to commit, or you got to pick one day and say, this is my stills day, and then another day for video or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then finally, I just kind of moved into video and stayed with it. What was your path to find that video path?
Yeah, that's a good question. For a long time, I was just doing stills, and I just loved it. Like if I wasn't doing it for work, it was just, if I had any free moment, that's what I would be doing, was taking pictures. After I did that for a few years, and like you said, you start to see like there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of, I mean, even more so now, I feel like, than 10 years ago, or a lot more so. But I started looking for ways I just felt like I really needed to differentiate what I was doing, or find what was like what I could contribute that was unique to this industry. If I was going to be able to grow there. And so that led me to, I started working a lot with biologists and scientists in the ecosystem. I had always been, just like many people, very interested in grizzly bears. They're so fascinating to sit to watch, and you can just tell there's a lot going on in that head. So I started, building some relationships with like the grizzly bear study team and some more local people working with bears. And somehow I stumbled across, I was reading research and started reading about grizzly bears digging up pine cones that squirrels had buried in the ground. And I kind of had in my head, I've been thinking, I want to get into some kind of story that hasn't really been told yet. And some to really dig into the ecology of it and get a unique perspective. And I was starting to get interested in camera trapping at that point, because I felt like that was a very unique take on wildlife photography and cinematography. And so, so I pretty much just settled on that story, and I decided I was going to go figure out everything there was to know about this particular phenomena. And so that's what I did for 5 years. I found sites where bears were digging up these cones from squirrels, and they're digging up, it's whitebark pine. So it may be something you're familiar with. It's a tree that's in pretty bad shape throughout the ecosystem, but the cones the seeds that are in those cones are like highly nutritious. They're a coveted resource in the ecosystem. And so, I just picked that as my personal project and just dove in. And then for 4 or 5 years, I focused on almost exclusively that. Like that was, if 399 was out with the Cubs, or like, whatever else was going on in the park that everybody else was going to shoot, I didn't care. Like I had just a single track mind. Like I was going to figure out how to tell the story and do it well. And in the process of doing that, it started off as stills, and I started getting some stuff that was very unique behavior. And I just thought, man, for this particular type of storytelling, you're just missing so much when you're just taking pictures. And I had always loved the still image, and there's something about that singular moment, right? And I still do. But from a behavioral standpoint, and like being able to see and learn about what's going on, like from from an ecological standpoint, video just felt like the way to go. And so that was why I made that pivot and started investing in video gear. And that's kind of what led me to where I am now, is eventually being able to have a reel and pitch that story. So that is now a sequence in this show that's coming out.
So how hard was it to go from the video from the stills to the video? Is that something you already had kind of figured out in your brain, or was that something where you had the stills dialed in?
So that particular project is with camera traps, like remote camera systems. So in some ways, I think that made my transition a bit easier, because it's a locked off shot and you're not pulling focus. There are some differences in camera settings and stuff like that. And you have to think about a sequence. Like you're not thinking about just one cool shot. You're thinking about, I'm setting up 12 different cameras that are all filming the same thing at the same time, but they're different focal lengths and different positions. So you're thinking a bit differently about it. But I think that made it maybe an easier transition for me. Whereas to now, like I'm shooting long lens and doing other stuff where like, I think that jump is maybe a little bit harder. But, some of it is just, a lot of it, I guess, is just practice, right? Like just learning like you're not using autofocus. Well, eventually I think we all will be using autofocus for video, but at the moment we're still pulling focus manually. And you have to be very, very steady on the tripod, and like you have to think. You just have to think differently about it. It's not about one moment. It's about, it's about 30 seconds unfolding. And unlike with with stills where you can fire off 15 frames a second and just get one good one, when you're shooting behavior on a video, you need to do it perfectly for at least 10 seconds. So I think that challenge for me was I really have enjoyed that challenge, because it's not that photography was easy, but I think it was just it was a different way to grow and to challenge myself. Because at some point, you get your autofocus down and you're shooting the same subjects and you're kind of just on autopilot. And so having to step back and be a little bit more maybe aware of what you were doing, for me, was a really enjoyable experience, and still is.
You started with the camera traps, you said what? So how many years ago was that when you kind of started with that?
About 6 years ago, starting with stills.
So that from there to even now, the change in technology, and I mean, it's just got to be huge. Every year is something new, and it's not like it's just what you said. It's not the same. It's not autopilot at all, right? Because every year it's something new. It's a new camera. It's a new lens. It's a new sensor. It's a new something. How hard is that? Or do you enjoy that challenge? Do you enjoy that? I mean, it's kind of cool to go into a situation where you got it figured out, but it's also kind of fun to figure it out, especially if you're going to up your game, right? So if you're going to take it to that next level, if you're using this new camera or whatever, that excitement is there. Yeah,
that's right. So I'm always putting that pressure on myself to try to be at the front edge of, whatever that is. And a lot of that is just, you have to be up to date with the new technology. I enjoy the user experience part of it, having to figure it out and finding new applications for newer technology. I think that's fun. I don't enjoy the cost part of it. It's a hard game to play as an individual. And I thought that still photography equipment was expensive, 600 and a few camera bodies, but you talk about we're going from a $13,000 lens as a 600 millimeter to for example, the cinema lens we use, the 50 to 1000 is $70,000. So it's a hard game to play. And if you're making that kind of investment, which I don't own one of those lenses, but if you're making that kind of investment, and then if within a few years, something, or same with a red camera, a new body comes out, it's just, it's hard. Yeah.
So talking about that, and then go back to what you just said about setting up a 12 camera shot.
Yeah.
You started trying to capture some of this bear behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of walk us through that. We're not going to ask you to give us any trade secrets, but walk us through that process. What kind of equipment you used for 12 angles?
Yeah.
How did that shot come together?
So a lot of what I'm doing now is come from the work that I did with the bears, and partly just the story that I was working on, and also the methods that I kind of really refined in that time. So I kind of had this vision of, and I wasn't the first person ever to do a camera trap sequence, but in my head, I had I could see the potential of what I could do with that technology. And, you could use one camera and get a still photo, which can be very cool. But I could, if I could get the money for 12 of them and I could have them all running at the same time, think about all the different cuts and angles you could get, and how you could really tell a story. And so, so that's what I started doing with the bears. The technology has changed a lot. I've used a lot of different systems. At the time, it was some custom built systems. And I worked with a guy named Jeff in Nebraska, who built some. I was working with the Sony A7S II because it was a really good low light body. Actually, I still work with it a lot. So you can, you're capturing behavior when it was way too dark to shoot stills, and also not having to use lights for some of that dawn and dusk behavior, which was really nice. So yeah, and that's what I mean. Now I'm on shoots and I'm using 30 cameras for one sequence. So, but I don't have to buy them all.
Say that gets easier when somebody else is paying for it, right?
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say it gets easier cost-wise, but then just the level of trying to, especially if you're trying to get one sequence with 12 cameras. I mean, just think about trying to keep those cameras out of your shots. The other cameras, right?
No, that's exactly right. It gets progressively harder after the third camera. I mean, it's like I will just sit there and scratch my head for hours. It's like putting a puzzle together. No, you're exactly right. Sometimes you have to hide them. The more you add, the more complicated that part gets. There's a lot of issues that come up with a system that is that complicated.
I guess I play with the camera traps a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. And you always think, I'm going to be really sly and I'm going to put this out there and this animal's going to walk right through and I'm going to get this cool shot and they're not even going to notice the camera.
Yeah.
They know the camera's there the minute they step foot, right?
Always.
How does that affect your thought process? When you're setting up that sequence, it's like, okay, I know that this bear, this mountain lion, or this whatever is going to see this camera, but maybe I can poach a shot from over here because the attention is going to be over here. I mean, is that going through your mind too? Is that
totally? Yeah, totally. And it really depends on the subject and the individual, right? So like when I first started with grizzly bears, I mean, this was just with the stills, and I did that very first setup, and I came back a couple of days later, everything was just trashed. And at first I was like, wow, like really excited because I thought, well, hopefully I got some shots, before that happened. And turns out the bear had arrived on the scene and then walked around the perimeter and trashed everything, stood up on all the metal poles, just like destroyed it, and then went in and did his thing afterwards. So I got nothing. So that was the first time I encountered that issue. And so I went back in the next day and I put up a couple cameras so that there was no way that he would get to one without at least getting on the camera, on the other camera. So I would get some shots, and that's exactly what happened. But yeah, it depends on, on the subject. So grizzly bears, for example, I don't necessarily worry about them, like being afraid of the gear and so being deterred from coming in. It's more a concern for the gear itself, and what they're going to do to it. But I have found that with them, like they usually come in if it's the first time that they've seen the gear, they're pretty suspicious of it and they knock it all over. But as soon as they knock it over, they don't care. Like they don't really eat it. They just knock it over. And it's like once they've dominated it and it doesn't resist it. I mean, it's the same thing. Like that's why you play dead, right? When you're attacked by a bear. And I think it's the same thing. It's like, they're like, they knock it over. Like, well, that was boring and time to move on. Black bears are the opposite. They just are the most destructive creatures on the planet. They eat everything. And I've had many sites I've had to just give up on because the black bears just are impossible. So the mountain lions are pretty chill for the most part, but you do have some cats that don't like it and will detour around it. It's hit and miss, but for the most part, they're pretty, they're not freaked out by it.
What is the one thing that you've got on camera? Like, so let's say you're going in to shoot a grizzly bear sequence.
Yeah.
What's that one shot where you got that was like, holy, it wasn't a bear. It was another animal that came through your setup and you're like, wow, that was super cool. I mean, is there wolverines? Is there skunks? Is there badgers? Is there wolves? I mean, what have been some of those really cool moments that have happened for you?
Well, that's an easy one. I'm not I think I can talk about this. We'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and say it. And then if we have to go back, we can edit it. So it was on these grizzly bear sites, so I started off on this project just wanting to document grizzly bears raiding these white bark pine cones from these squirrel middens. What I didn't know at the time is that I was about to stumble into what was a much bigger story and had it was very significant for conservation and ecology in the ecosystem, because we knew that these pine cones were important for other species, but I don't think we had fully realized like how other animals were using these sites. And so, for example, I've had 9 long-eared owls at once, several years in a row on these sites. Hunting the voles that are underneath the surface of the middens, and it's like a consistent thing that like we're learning that actually these owls are. In this case, I think it was a bunch of chicks that had just like fledged nearby. But all of the different sites I work on have owls that are like predating on the rodents that live in this environment that the squirrels create with the midden, which is basically just like mulch, right? It's all torn up earth that's been used to bury cones for years and years. You also have long-tailed weasels and pine martens that are there consistently also hunting. The pine martens are also eating seeds. You have porcupines that are showing up and also stealing cones from squirrels, which like we didn't know that was a thing. We have northern flying squirrels coming in and stealing cones from the red squirrels. There's just a lot going on. And so I guess that's not one particular thing, but it was just like this, wow, mind blown at how much is actually going on here. And that's what's so cool about camera trapping to me is you just get to see behavior that you can't really see otherwise. It's like it's the same as like your trail cams on your property that like the hunters use and stuff, but you're just getting a very unique perspective into the natural world. And I mean, scientists and researchers use trail cams a lot more now than they used to, even just, for their part of research, doing population and density estimates and stuff like that. But certainly what I'm doing is more of like the qualitative side of just like focusing on, particular subjects and what that behavior looks like on like a case-by-case basis. But
so when you're setting up that sequence and you're like, okay, I'm going to get this bear coming through, and then you get all this footage and you see all this other activity, then you're like, okay, now I need 10 more cameras because now I need to be down on the ground and now I need to have bigger lens. I mean, what's that like? I mean, looking at the footage has got to be like Christmas every time, right? Because you're just so excited to see what you got.
That's exactly what I say. It always is like Christmas morning when you're checking a camera. But you're right. It just makes it even more complicated because if you're trying to film a pine marten, you need to be different focal lengths, different angles. You need to be a lot closer to your subject than a grizzly bear. So you kind of have to pick and choose. I mean, for me, I focused on trying to at first just document what was going on because I also felt like it was pretty important from a scientific standpoint. And so I wanted to have some wide coverage where we could just see what was going on and then have a lot more mids. As I started doing more like, focusing on a sequence that's more story driven, then you also have direction because you're working with a producer director and they'll tell you exactly like, hey, we need more tights. Like, the first year was getting more of our wides and mids. And like this year, let's go for those really risky detail shots. Like we want to see the paw pull the cone out of the hole, stuff like that. Or we want to see like the owl and we want it to be a headshot on this branch. So, it helps.
We want a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. Actually, I was listening to a podcast today, another podcast that's unrelated, but they were talking about the squirrels and how they do this. And apparently they don't do it with just the white bark pine, right? They do it across the country, right? Different squirrels. And black bears will raid the nests up back in the east and up north or whatever, right? But it's a very interesting story. But one of the questions I have for you is when you set up your traps like that, are you ever just kind of like also hanging out and spend some time with your still camera and just kind of watching things unfold? And have you ever done that and had something cool happen?
Sometimes I do. It depends. I would say for the most part, I'm usually getting out of there because I'm always very conscious of my presence on this, what is like a pretty sensitive site. And so I just feel like the less time I spend there, the better. And the more chances of the bears getting the food they need and me getting the behavior that I want. But, certainly I have been in there at times and like I've had the weasels come in and run around when I've been there. I've had the martens, I've had the owls, I've had everything. I've had bears walk on, had several bears walk right in on me and, way closer than they should be, but they're sneaky, man. You'd think that like for a big animal like that you'd hear them a mile away. They are stealthy. I mean, it's just, I was laying down with a squirrel filming him and looked up and was like, okay, hi.
Let me just back out of here.
Yeah.
Can you explain? It's a midden, right? Midden.
That's right.
I used to think, the way I used to remember it is I used to sell pictures through Minden Pictures. So it was Minden.
Right.
And that's how I'd remember it. But I knew it wasn't Minden. It was more midden. And I'd see them all over. You see them all over Alaska. When you're out hiking. I mean, with the red squirrels, they just make those. And can you just describe what it is? Because I'm not sure that everybody even knows what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure. So a midden is basically a squirrel's stash of pine cones that they prepare for the winter. So in this particular case, these are like in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, these are red squirrels. And come, August, starting about August, the cones ripen in all the trees, and they go to work, and they start like 80% of their activity from August to mid-October is just harvesting cones. Like they just go nonstop. And they cache them all in their sites, and midden is basically also, it's just a squirrel's territory. So it's like, they're, I don't know, 10 by, like some of my sites are like 10 by 15 feet, or some are a little bit bigger. They kind of vary, but some can be like as big as a living room. And yeah, so they bury all their cones in there. And then when there's 10 feet of snow on top of it or whatever there is in the winter, they tunnel down through, and they have enough food to make it through. Because you got to think, they start nesting in like November. And a lot of this is happening, at least on my sites, it's in the high country. And so, the snow's not melted until July. So they're relying on that food stash for a long time. So, and like you said, they do harvest more than white bark pine. So even though the bears come in and the porcupines come in and the nutcrackers come in and steal the pine cones, there's still a lot of other cones that the squirrels can feed on throughout the winter. So the bears are only interested in the white bark pine.
So what I think about when I see a midden like that is, think of a baseball dugout where everybody on the team is chewing sunflower seeds.
Yep.
And they spit out all the shells. And then there's just this pile of shells, right? And then you're like, holy, this. But mixed in with all these piles of just bits and pieces of these pine cones are the actual seeds and cones and all that stuff within this big, humongous pile, right?
It sounds. Yes, so I think it sounds like what you're describing is like a lot of the times the squirrels will have like their favorite perch where they will eat. And so that's like, you'll have a big pile of seed husks that piles up over time. So that's going to be located within the midden, but the midden is likely a larger area than that.
Oh, okay.
And so they're usually caching cones. Sometimes they cache individual seeds, and sometimes it's cones. And they'll bury them, like 5-6 inches underneath the surface of the earth. So you don't necessarily see them, but you can see where they've been digging, and you can see like the holes that they've punched through. Sometimes they will cache them up in trees. Like they get pretty creative with it. And I see them also, like they respond. So when the bears come in and steal them all, squirrels are very upset, and they sit there and scream, and then they run around frantically, and then they go right back to work. But sometimes they will put them in different spots. And so like after it gets raided by a bear, sometimes they'll climb up and stash them in like, if there's like a witch's broom up in a tree, or if there's a hollow cavity or something like that.
Which presents a whole nother set of problems for camera traps, right?
Yeah, you got to climb the trees. Yeah.
Set up a chute. So I know you're obviously using cameras. They're obviously in cases. But how are they triggered? How are you powering? Again, without giving away all your trade secrets, because you worked at this a long time. Sure. But just kind of for everybody's information, if somebody wanted to try a log going across their favorite stream, how would you go about doing that?
So I'm currently working with Cognisys, is the company that makes camera trap equipment. And so I use another company's Contraptions, which I've used some of their stuff in the past. But basically you can buy, there's two different types of triggers. So there's an active trigger and there's a passive trigger. And it really depends on what you're going after as to which one really fits the bill. So one of them is like, for example, if you're on a trail and you have a real pinch point, you know exactly where that animal is going through, and what you're going for is like a travel shot, something passing through, then probably an active sensor is the best option. And that's basically, you have two units. There's a transmitter and a receiver. And it's basically just sending a signal to the transmitter sends a signal to the receiver. And when that signal is interrupted, it counts as a trigger. And then that will relay a signal to the camera, and it will start recording. So you're anticipating where they're going to walk. And in my case, I'm shooting video. And so it needs to be like, I need interframe. So I basically need enough time for the cameras to be up and rolling before the mountain lion walks into the scene or whatever it is. Yeah, and the passive ones are more for like behavior, like if something is unfolding like in one particular, like if you're maybe filming a bear on a carcass or something, something that's happening over maybe an hour in one spot, you would probably use a passive sensor, which kind of surveys that whole area, and it works off of heat. So it's, seeing basically any movement within that zone, as opposed to like one particular section of a trail.
So that's heat. It's not like a blade of grass could trigger it. It would be more of
it's a heat signature. So yes, but it like wind blowing grass, you basically have like different cells. And so when the subject moves from, depending on what your sensitivity is on your sensor, when it moves from like one cell to another, or like, across 3 cells at one time or whatever, that counts as a detection, and then it would trigger the camera. So yes, you have a lot of trouble with it. You have wind, or you have, a limb blowing, and all of that is stuff you have to just mitigate in the field. So yeah, it's a lot of troubleshooting.
Oh my gosh.
Jason and I have talked about this.
It's basically all I do is troubleshoot.
I was going to say,
although I'm getting better at it.
You're mapping things out in your mind nonstop, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
but it takes a long time. I mean, it's, I could spend an entire day setting up 3 cameras, depending on the complexity of the site. So
that's what I was going to say, because you've got to anticipate, and obviously you're going off of experience, either tracking or, experience where you've seen animals in a certain location.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you've got to anticipate the trail that they're going to take to get to the midden,
mm-hmm.
and then also, the timing, I think, is what probably would take the longest, and that's got to just come from experience, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's say you're working with a producer or director from one of these channels and like, so I need this, and this. When you're setting up that camera, like you're saying, you're trying to predict it. You're using manual focus, so you're predicting this manual focus spot. What's your thought process on settings? Are you going for huge amounts of depth of field? Because you've got to, right? You can't have such a shallow depth of field that you only have like 1 or 2 seconds of footage, or is that acceptable?
Yeah, it just depends. It just depends on what. Sometimes you don't have an option. You
can't say that. It just depends is the answer for everything photographic. So
but if you're shooting at night, like you have to shoot wide open, or anything that's low light, you just have to. So like in an ideal world, I would have a little bit more depth of field for every shot, but I just, you can't always do that. And it ends up being that a lot of the time I have to shoot shallow, at least for some of the shots. And so then you just have to do the best you can. So if you're shooting parallel to the way the subject is moving, you can shoot wide open and pretty much be in focus the whole time, so you can at least get your wide. For the tights, it's really tough. It is just it's pretty quick, a couple seconds sometimes, but it depends. If they come by during the day when there's more light and the camera's able to stop down, then it's fine. But
what's the biggest lens you've ever been able to use in a camera trap?
135.
Because you have to keep it within an enclosure, right? So that's kind of your determining factor?
Yes. Yeah, it is. Certainly. A lot of the times you do custom builds. So anything's possible. I think it has probably more to do with just the needs of what you're shooting. And most of you're doing camera trapping because you're getting kind of up close and personal and getting that kind of look. And so even when you shoot with a, 85 or 100, that's a pretty tight shot as is with camera trapping. So,
right.
Beyond that, if you're far enough away at some point, then you just would shoot on long lens and maybe be in a hide or something. So,
right. So do these new cameras excite you? When you hear animal eye detection, are you like, is that going to be the new holy grail, or is that just another gimmick?
I think it eventually will be the holy grail for everything. Like I said, I think that the eye tracking for people right now that Sony has is incredible. The animal eye tracking is not as good, but I think it's going to get there. I haven't shot with the R5, but I've seen some videos and some buddies have shot with the R5 and just used eye tracking. And it looks like it holds pretty well. So yeah, I mean, I think that excites me a lot. It's, I think it's just stuff is accelerating so quickly now. But I mean, even just like that new Sony announcement the other day about the A1.
Right.
It's like, yeah.
So I got to know, how many cameras and or lenses have you lost due to damage from doing this?
Not as many as you would think. I'm trying to think if I've lost. I mean, I've had some cameras go down and just like with shipping issues, like they weren't packed. If somebody sent them to me, they weren't packed properly or something like that. But like, as far as like in the field, I haven't lost anything that valuable, which is crazy.
So the housings are that solid that they are pretty much bear proof and stuff?
Yeah, like I said, that when the Grizzlies want to, they just knock it over.
Oh,
and beyond that, like they kind of lose interest, Black bears, I've lost sensors too. Like I chased a black bear with my sensor in his mouth and never got it back.
Give me that back.
Yeah.
You need to put one of those little, what are those little devices that you can put on your backpack so you know where your backpack's at? Or find my iPhone. Yeah, you need to find my iPhone.
Yeah, so I could find a pile of bear scat in a couple days.
Exactly.
I think it's interesting the point you just made, that I got a buddy, Scott Ramsey, that works for UPS, and he listens to the podcast. So he's going to be riding around in his UPS truck here in the next few weeks, and he's going to hear that UPS is harder on your cameras than grizzly bears are.
That's true.
Just want to make that point for all you shipping professionals.
So I want to back up just a little bit. So with these new cameras, with like the R5, and you say that it's possible and there's some excitement behind it, do you dread that? Do you like, oh my gosh, there's another 3 months in the field that's just going to be trial and error, and I'm just going to have to see if this is going to work? Or will you wait till it's pretty solid?
Well, before I take something on a shoot, I have to have that thing like battle tested, because the stakes are, as you know, extraordinarily high. A lot of money goes into it. And so I'm only working with stuff I know. So like I would not just take an R5 out unless for example, or any new camera, unless I've really been able to put it through its paces. And so that is hard because there's not always time to do that. I mean, I guess this year there's been a little bit more time, but
right.
But even still, it's been pretty much nonstop. To go test a camera for a few months, like you might want to do, it's hard to find that time. So sometimes you have to take more risks than you might want to. Like I did, I've been in a few situations where I had to put gear out that I did not get to test very much beforehand. And there's always consequences for that, but I think you go in kind of knowing that that's the case, and you need to be on site and be very reactive to it. But yeah, certainly every camera has its own quirks.
Right. You'd have to hedge your bets and just take enough coverage where you know the cameras that you got, you're getting it, but then you hopefully have these bonus cameras that might be cool.
Yep, exactly.
And we've talked a lot about the cameras. How about power?
So they are just lithium-ion rechargeables. So like you can use, Cognisys makes their own. I've used big Sony battery packs a lot in the past. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. Yeah.
So you're not using solar at all? I'm
not, because I mean, you can if you're in a situation where you need to leave it out for like a year or something where you can't check it. A lot of the situations I'm in are, I need to be more hands-on, or I need to be, if it's like a year where the cameras are out, I want to be there every 6 to 8 weeks. And so there's just, you have the opportunity to address issues and swap out batteries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it's possible, but I'd say it's a pretty unusual situation where you can leave something out for that long, for like a year, and you're going to have other things that are going to be an issue other than just battery life,
Right.
Something's going to get knocked over. It's going to get dirty. It's going to get, who knows?
I was working on a project the other day. We were just kind of setting it up, and I've used these other cameras, just the consumer camera traps that actually will send a picture to your phone once it's been taken.
Yeah.
And we did a big time-lapse project for a big corporate project at one point where I was just not confident leaving that stuff for 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Not knowing. And for the big time-lapse project, we had a camera that would send in at least one picture a day. And that was just my little confidence thing. But when you're in the woods, you think, oh man, if I just had cell phone coverage, I could have that consumer camera that would just more or less just survey my site. That way I could at least look and see if a camera's been knocked over or whatever. Do you try that stuff? Is that something? Do you have a confidence kind of thing?
Well, so it's funny, Doug and I just did this on a shoot where we put out a ton of cell cams, and he wanted to use two, so we used two different models, the Moultrie and then the Spy Point on each site, because I think they were using different carriers, and so but that's exactly how we use them, is to monitor what's going on. So it's very helpful. So you can know, did something come and destroy the gear, or do we need to go check on it? And even not just for camera trapping, just for any kind of site that you want to monitor that you're filming. It's the Spy Points are great. They're pretty cheap too. Yeah, we use them a lot, like on these productions for all kinds of reasons.
I guess the name of the game is just having cell phone coverage, right? Just being in the right spot where you've got it.
Well, that's right, and that's if you're working stateside, like not always, but there's a lot of times you do have enough, because you don't need much. Like you can get those things to send a picture through with just one bar. But sometimes that's not an option if you're super remote.
So you said you're moving toward doing some long lens work as well. Is that just project dependent?
I have over the past few years been doing that, and sometimes I will just do a long lens shoot, and other times I combine the two, and so it's a really cool way for me to set up. I can use the traps and then shoot long lens to get some supplemental behavior. Or just sometimes I'll do shoots that's just hide work where you're just sitting in the blind and you're just doing long lens and it has nothing to do with traps. So
what I've run into lately is someone will call BBC or Nat Geo or something, and they'll be like, well, we only have enough budget for one shooter, so can you do long lens, and can you do camera traps, and can you run a cable cam, and can you fly a drone, and can you, they just want everything, but fortunately they give you enough time, but then it's still a ton of things that your brain has to be on point all the time.
Yeah, you're right. That's hard. That's just, it's finding a way to get yourself the experience that you need to be able to say, yes, I can do that. For me, I just decided, okay, I'm going to I know I want to do this. And so I'm going to figure out how to get myself the experience that I need so that I think it's a balance of not overselling yourself, right? But also taking things that make you feel a little bit nervous, but knowing that you can come through on it. But it's you need to have some experience. So you because a lot of confidence just comes from experience and knowing that you can do it. So I don't know where I was going with that, but I think, I've made a point to just get that experience however I can. If I have to rent kit, if I have to borrow it, and just on my own time, I just do that so that when I'm in that situation, I feel that when the stakes are high, that I can do the job. So, but it's hard. There's a lot. And some of these guys do a lot. I also think that having a specialty is a good thing, depending on what it is. Some people are just underwater people and that's what they do. And some people are hired for a job because they're really good at long lens, but they also fly a drone for other stuff. But I think usually people are hired because they do one thing really, really well. And then they can also do these other things.
So what's that one thing or that one shoot? What's your dream shoot? You watch, one thing that stands out in my mind is, I think it was behind the scenes on Our Planet, I think was the name of the show. Mm-hmm. And you see I think they put in 2 years getting the Siberian tigers. And that was just super sequence. Cool, right? Yeah. Just a cool sequence. Mm-hmm. What's that one thing for you where you would be like, oh, that's my jam. That's what I want to go do.
I guess I feel very like fortunate that I think I'm actually doing it right now. But I can't, it's under NDA, so I can't say what it is. So we might have to revisit it when the shows come out. But there's a sequence on the National Geographic show, and then also with Planet Earth. Both of them are like what I think my whole life. That's what I would have answered. Like, yeah, that's what I would want to do. Work with an animal like that in a setting like that. So unfortunately, I can't say any more right now. But
hey, cliffhanger.
Yeah,
stay tuned. Come back in 2 years when we have Jake Davis back on the show.
There you go.
That's awesome.
You know, to that point, real quick, I was watching your video on your landing page on your website.
Okay, yeah.
Search of a moment.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
I thought you were going to say that was that elk moment. I mean, I'm such an elk guy, and that was really cool little video, first of all. But I loved how you showed that wasn't just one moment. You showed up one morning and this elk crossed the river, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was really getting that still, as far as like a still image goes. That might be what my just like most rewarding experience. Everything just came together perfectly that morning. And it was either sitting in a blind and very cold. And then you just like, the first group of elk crossed behind me, and it was like I could hear them. I only had one opening, and I was looking out the front, and I thought they were going to step on me. And then I heard them get in the water, and they couldn't have been like 4 feet behind my blind, and I was like, you cannot be serious. I walked like 2 steps too far today. Yeah. And then a second bull with a whole new harem came and crossed the river right in front of me. So that was special, and I've been able to shoot that on now on video too, and I've done a lot of long lens work with that. And that's been, definitely one of my favorite things to shoot. It's just such an exciting time of year once they start bugling and you get that fog in the morning. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to beat fall out there in the Greater Yellowstone. Like September, October it's absolutely magical.
Yeah. Yeah. It's everything. It's all of it, right? It's the cool mornings, the colors, the everything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Jake, for us newbies to camera trapping, where would you suggest? What's a good way to start to kind of just break the ice for yourself? Because it is, I get, I'll have 20 red fox dens and 5 or 6 swift fox dens every year, and I've always thought about trying to catch the trails coming to or from the den where the adults are bringing food and leave a camera trap out there because I can do it on private land. But what's the best way to start?
I would start with either Cognisis or Contraptions. You can get on their websites and just get. I would probably start with a passive sensor, just one passive sensor, and start with one camera and start small. And then once you feel comfortable with that, maybe add some flashes to it if you want. I mean, every little layer that you add is, tenfold in complexity and issues that arise from it. So I think just getting the fundamentals down, learning your camera. Every camera is so different in the settings, and you're going to have to go sometimes deep into the menu settings and find some weird, quirky things that, are going to make that camera work with that system well. And so just taking the time to do that and do it in a place that's accessible for you. Like, don't go set your first camera out like somewhere that you're not going to be back for a month. Like, put it in your backyard, somewhere that you can go the next day and learn from it. Because the more you can visit it, the quicker you're going to learn, and the more you can and see what's going wrong and do some problem solving. You have to expect that there are going to be issues though, and you have to lean into that as part of the process. It's really about like getting into a mindset that's you're not getting frustrated, you're not like overwhelmed. You just there's always a solution, and you have to just take a very methodical approach to it. And it's really enjoyable for me. It's like almost like a meditation for me.
It's got to be like a challenge, right? It's got to be like, I am going to get this. I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I think, in Wyoming, a good place for, and I was asking for myself, obviously, but also for our listeners. And, one thing that would be a really easy place to test it is on a water hole. With prong, you're going to get pronghorn, that. But you probably get coyotes. You may get swift fox. You may get some grouse. Badgers, yeah. There's a lot of opportunity on a water hole in the Western Plains where it's dry anyway. So that's, and they're all over the place. You just have to find those little pockets.
Is it best to start out with the thought process of getting stills and then move your way into video? Or would you say, nah, just start with video and just start figuring this out? And, the wave of the future is video for the most part. I mean, if you're looking for something for Instagram or whatever, would you just say go into video and do it? Or better to start with stills and perfect that?
That's a good question. In some ways, it might be better to start with stills. I mean, that's what I did, because you have to get one particular thing perfect. And I think that's just maybe a good way to start. I don't know that it's not black and white. You could certainly do it either way.
And that's really just a setting on the camera, right? You're just going in. Your sensors are going to work the same way. It's just telling the camera, or the camera just needs to know when it's triggered, it's going to shoot a still or shoot a video, right?
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
I want to play with it. It's I've done a little bit, but not enough. Not on your level. You talk to you and you get excited. You're like, oh man, this would be so cool. I'm gonna go set up. For me, three would be a lot, right? 3 would be like, oh, this would be a blast. But I can't imagine managing 30 cameras out in the field in a couple of different locations and trying to make sure that they're all firing. And with video, do you use any artificial light, or is it all natural?
Sometimes. I would say for the most part, no, if we can avoid it. But I really like doing that and getting very creative with it. I basically treat it like lighting like a movie, like a Hollywood set. So I get very creative with it. But a lot of the times for one, when you're adding light, it's also it's something that's changing in the environment. So it depends on your subject. So like, if they walk in and all of a sudden lights come on, it does like a lot of times make them pause and say, something's weird here. And so for that reason, if the stakes are high and like it's a behavior that I think I can get without lighting, sometimes I won't do it. And also it just looks very natural, if you could just using natural light. So, but sometimes if it's completely nocturnal behavior, you have to do it.
Huh. So if you're going to set up a camera trap, would you recommend building your own box? Like go buy a Pelican case and cut it out and do it that way? Or is it best just to say, you know what, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to spend whatever, $1,000 or whatever that enclosure is.
I just would buy the enclosure because you don't come out that far ahead by building your own. It depends on what you're like. If you have a really custom need, sometimes you customize a box, but the Cognisys boxes, it's not, I don't think it's overpriced for what it is.
So this might be a proprietary question, and if it is, you don't have to answer it. But do you run on, like, are you setting aperture priority? I mean, yeah. Or are you just setting manual and saying, I'm going for this lighting condition and this is the setting, and if I get it, I get it, or if I don't, I don't?
I do both.
Really?
I hate to say this again, but it depends. And I really do. I really do use both.
And that's why he has 30 cameras.
Like obviously, when you're shooting video, the one thing that you can't your shutter needs to stay fixed.
Right.
And so that's whereas like if you're shooting stills and you're trapping, you have a lot more. Like you can approach it. People do a lot of different things there, depending like on what their needs are.
If you're going to fix your shutter speed, do you let the ISO float, or will you let the aperture float?
I usually let the ISO float. Yeah. And sometimes I float both, but never the shutter.
Man,
you do have a little shutter. You do have a little aperture like flicker, but that's like, you can take care of that. Like a post house can take care of that. So.
And what you mean by that is if it's like, if the animal's starting out in the light and it's exposed for that,
exactly.
But then it comes into a shaded area and you're going to see that adjustment in the camera, but you can fix that in post, or if the shot's cool enough, they're going to fix it.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's like sometimes if I can just use ISO, I just do that. So that I don't have to deal with that flicker.
And then do you set limitations on that, like a high and a low, or will you let it go to
on the ISO?
Yeah.
I cap it. I always cap it on, but every camera has a different limit, what's acceptable, and every producer has a different idea of what's acceptable for noise.
Right.
So, it depends on if it's an individual doing it too, like where you don't want to go and do a bunch of heavy noise reduction in Premiere, and you just want to have something that looks good out of camera, then like maybe you're not going to let it go as high.
So are there times when you'll be getting video when your ISO's max capped and you're overexposed, or is the camera smart enough to, if it meets that cap and it's no longer exposing property, to not take the shot? Does that make sense? Will it just record no matter what, and it's going to take footage and eat up memory card space and burn battery, or will it know that it's above that and not exposed properly and not video?
Oh, the camera is not that smart. No.
Oh, okay, I just was curious. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Right?
So you have a lot of clips that are not good light.
Okay, perfect.
Or that are black.
Those got to be the heartbreakers too, right? Where it's that Christmas morning and you're looking at your footage, you're like, there's a black one, and then I got nothing else.
Well, a lot of the times if it's cats, you're like, like we didn't have anything in the day, for the past month, but here's like a couple that are like 2 a.m. I think I probably know who that was. Yeah. And sometimes you'll have trail cams out too that you can reference to see what came through and stuff like that. Or sometimes you'll have moonlight and you can see what it was. It's just not usable footage.
Right.
Yeah.
But these production houses, they know that this is not an exact science. So it sounds to me like when we were talking earlier, they'll give you a year or 2 years in some cases to capture a sequence because it does take time. Is that true, or do they just say you got 30 days to do this?
I think, every producer is different and every budget is different. So it's great when you get to work with somebody who thinks big and lets you, I feel like I can just go out there and really do anything I want, like anything I can dream up. Those are the most exciting shoots for me to work on. And that just also involves giving you the time you need to get it done. So if I can say, look, if you want to leave them out for a year, I need to be there every 6 to 8 weeks, and they're willing to do that, then I'm stoked to be on that project because I know I will get the best results that I can get. So other times you're in situations where it's nobody's fault, but you're just scheduling is tight and you just like, for whatever reason, you've got a week to just get what you can. And I don't like being in that situation. Sometimes I will do it, but yeah.
Fascinating. It is totally fascinating. It's pretty cool stuff. I mean, it should be something for our audience where you can just look at the opportunities, but with the opportunities come many, many months or years of just knowledge base.
Sure.
Just creating that knowledge base to feel confident enough to tell BBC or Nat Geo, hey, I can do this and I'm going to nail it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah.
This is definitely,
no matter what you're doing, you just got to get out there and find time to put your own time in. I mean, that's what I did I really enjoyed the workshop business and I still have that business going. But everything else I did was really a means to just enable me to put the time in that I knew I needed to put in to do what I wanted to do with this. So
where can people find out about your workshops, or the ones that you still have going?
So revealedinnature.com is the website. That is a bit outdated. The past couple of years have gotten away from me. So it's actually going through a rehab right now. So, but that's the place to go. So I actually work, the workshop business is changing a bit. So I still lead trips, but I also work with some other guides, some other photographers. And so we offer trips in the Greater Yellowstone and also doing some stuff in Central and South America coming up. So all that will be on the website within the next month or two.
And is this just photographic workshops, or do you do video workshops, and then do you do camera trap workshops, or is it just one thing?
Yeah, these are just photographic workshops for the time being, but maybe down the road there might be some video ones, but yeah.
I'm sensing a camera trap workshop. That's what I'm sensing.
All right. If we get enough interest.
Yeah. You got 3 right here.
There you go.
We need to each have 3. It's a 60-day workshop.
Yeah, right.
60-day workshop. All right.
And that'll get your feet wet.
Yeah, that'll just barely get you frustrated.
Yeah.
Well, Jake, I know the 2 guys that recommended you as a guest on the podcast. We've asked about, camera trapping and tried to find somebody that we could get on that was experienced, and both of these guys said, yeah, you got to talk to Jake. He's the guy, and they were not wrong. I'll say that. It's been fun to visit with you about this, and this is something that it's kind of an opportunity for everybody to spread their wings a little bit and try something new, no matter what equipment you've got. And if you've got that camera that you're thinking about getting rid of, maybe this is something that you do instead of selling it.
You're not going to get that much for it anyway.
Right. Jake, thanks a ton for your time, and I know you've got a lot going on. We've been trying to make this work for a couple weeks now, but I appreciate you being patient, hanging with us, and making it work when you did have a little bit of a break. And again, Revealed in Nature on Instagram, revealedinnature.com, and then do you have a Facebook presence as well?
No, not to speak of.
Okay.
So yeah.
But you do have Instagram.
But I do have Instagram and the website. Yep.
And we'll link to all those in the show notes. So if anybody wants to go look. Great. And then maybe if you have some pictures of the middens, some of those classic shots, just because I think it's a hard thing to picture in your mind until you actually see it, then that would be cool. Sure. And then anything else. Totally, yeah. Obviously, they can get some stuff from your website. But if you could send us a few pictures to put on the show notes page, that would be spectacular.
Yep. You got it.
I was thinking of a good descriptor, and I think the best one that I came up with was, it is the spot you find in the forest where you want to take a nap.
I think so.
Until that bear comes walking up to you.
Until the bear sneaks in.
I would say it's probably, exactly. It's probably not the place in the forest you should take a nap.
but it'll look comfortable enough. Yeah.
That's right.
I bet that was a crazy experience, that bear walking up to you, just kind of like checking you out. And
No, I've had them, I've walked in and had them, right there, and they stand up, because it's pretty dense forest. So if it's like harsh light, you like scope it out and you make noise, but sometimes you walk in on them, or vice versa. But never had a problem. Never like, just talk to them. They're pretty responsive and they back off. I mean, sometimes they linger, like they really want to come in, but never aggressive. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
It's got to be cool to be sitting here talking to us on a podcast, knowing that your cameras are out there working.
Right.
That's like, what my friend said on. He was working with me on one of these last shoots. Was like, we left 30 of them out there, and he's like, "Man, it's just like we just employed 30 cameramen and we just left them."
That's like now making money while you sleep,
and you don't have to pay them.
Right. You just have to buy them outright.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, guys. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, and look forward to getting this one out, and look forward to getting with you in the field one of these days too, hopefully.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Stay in touch.
Thanks, Jake.
You've been listening to the Wild and Exposed podcast. If you haven't yet, please give us a rating and a review, and make sure you're subscribed so that you'll get every episode we produce as soon as we drop it. And as always, thanks for tuning in.